Hello, this is Nick here from Gorgon Reviews. I am talking with Paige Bethmann, the director of the documentary Remaining Native. Remaining Native is a documentary about Koo Stevens, an Indigenous teenager who wanted to go to the University of Oregon and become a great Olympic level cross-country runner. And it is also about his family's history, including his great-grandfather's escape from an Indian boarding school. Thank you so much time for spending your time here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I like to ease into these interviews to get to know the person a little better. So, although it's not related to the documentary, what's the first movie you remember seeing in theaters?
Oh, in theaters. I think it has to be a Disney movie. I think I saw, I think it was either Toy Story or Aladdin in theaters for the first time.
Remaining Native is your first feature-length documentary as the director, but not your first foray into film and television shows. What would you say made you want to get involved in this field?
Yeah, growing up, my grandmother was a storyteller. She's a Mohawk storyteller, and so a lot of my time spent with her was listening to her tell our creation stories, and just she just had so much detail and so much character that I was always a very visual person when it came to just thinking about stories. And it was something I translated into high school where I didn't want to write any more papers, and I was always proposing to do a video instead. So we had to read The Crucible. I made like a trailer for The Crucible instead of like writing an essay. And so I was really just excited to be able to express myself through art form. And also, I was always asking a lot of questions all the time. So it kind of lended itself to studying film and TV in college.
Um, this is a multi-part question. How'd you first hear about Koo and his story? And with the follow-up, when did you know you needed to tell his story as a documentary, and how'd you first get involved with him?
Yeah, in 2021, I was working at Vox Media in New York City. I had been working there for about 6 years. I was working on long form and short form nonfiction. And in May of that year, that's when the news broke of the 215 unmarked graves of Indigenous children in Kamloops, Canada. And I think for me, I was noticing, the reactions from my own community. My family, my great grandmother also went to an Indian boarding school, and it's a part of my family history. And I started seeing, reactions coming with people wanting to share their stories. And just starting to express, all of the painful memories that existed around the boarding schools. And I also saw people who knew nothing about this history. It's not something that's taught. And I think the news really elevated it to the mainstream. And during that time, I was sort of trying to sort out my own feelings. And a friend of mine sent me an article that was written about Koo and his intention to run the 50 miles of his great grandfather. And I was really moved by that because here's this like 17-year-old kid wanting to do this like grand gesture to honor his great grandfather. And I just thought about, what can I do to honor my family? And so I had been working in film and I reached out to Koo's mom, not wanting to be a creepy lady DMing like a 17-year-old kid. And I just talked to her. I talked to her about my family story and just, the idea of wanting just to capture this run. And she invited me out there. I went with a small crew out there to document the run. I didn't think it was going to evolve into being a feature film, but when I spent time out there, I just noticed like how much drive and character Koo has. And his dream of being a D1 runner, he comes from a place where he has no coach, no team, no support, and this big goal of University of Oregon. It's like the best track and field program in the country. And I think I was really curious to see how he could use this time period of kind of reconciling with these emotions around the boarding schools to see how that could drive him as a runner.
Yeah, that news break that you mentioned in 2021, it's strange because I can say in history classes growing up, I definitely heard of these boarding schools, but it was like a sentence in a class, you know? And then when that news broke, it's like, oh, for a lot more people suddenly, this was a lot bigger deal that we probably should have been making, more notes about a lot sooner. Um, and because of that story, like we've actually had a lot of documentaries about that in the last few years. It's definitely been like, let's get this message out there and going. And most of them bring up the horrors and trauma associated with these schools, which is definitely appropriate. But I would say with remaining native, it does that along with giving what I would kind of say a message of hope.
Mhm.
Maybe was that intentional?
Absolutely. I think that I really wanted to make a film that didn't just center the trauma of the boarding schools, because I think this is a story that Native people know already. We like know the pain. You feel the pain generationally. And I think for me, the film is really meant to recreate the ethos of the Remembrance Run in which community came together. And when we're able to come together and talk and start, sharing, there's like the dancing at the end. When we're able to like practice our culture as Native people, that's like where the real hope and healing can begin. And I think the film really explores how, being Native, um, and remaining Native, it's not something that is so easy. It's like you're up against these societal pressures, you're up against the assimilation policies that existed for so long, and it takes you making a decision every day, like how am I going to practice my culture? How am I going to continue carrying these histories and legacies that we just can't detach ourselves from. And what I think with Ku, his ability to be able to run for purpose and when his ability to achieve success, whether that looks like organizing a 50-mile run in the desert or getting recruited by Oregon, I think it was just a really interesting way to approach the topic, to know that this pain exists, but it's painful healing. We are moving forward and we're going to continue on, generations to come.
Mhm. And so that comes up with the title, Remaining Native. It's very strong and evocative. Is there a story about how that title came to be and when, like, you found out it was perfect?
Yeah, I think for me, we are going to call it Remembrance Run, and then people in my team like couldn't even spell the word remembrance, you know. But I think it was like this idea and concept that Ku's father said to me, which was, we were talking about his great grandfather escaping boarding school, and he said, he left to stay Indian, like because that was the only way that he thought that he was going to retain his culture. By staying Indian, he needed to run away. And so for me, it started to think about, the fact that like this was a choice for him and a choice to continue on his culture. So when I thought about remaining Native, I was like, okay, here is something that I've dealt with in my life as an Indigenous person, being up against, modern society. How does this like play into this idea that it's a responsibility? It's like we are the folks who are left, from this time period. Like, how do we, continue on? And I also think there were all the news about the remains that were being found at the time. So it was sort of like another, hidden dual part of the word, that there were remains that were found along this time period.
Now, Ku's not here for this, but you had to go and document one of the remembrance runs he did. He did it for 3 years in a row. Can you speak on aspects of the run, like how difficult it was, how it was for a group of people? I think some of them non-runners, what you got to experience. Did you have to run?
So yeah, I mean, it is brutal, and I think what is so eye-opening is that the organizing of the run, you have support. There are support vehicles that come on the way. You have Gatorade, you have snacks, you have pop-up tents with shade.
Mhm.
It's and yet it's still really difficult. It's 100 degrees in the middle of August. You have to climb over 1,000 feet of elevation. The terrain changes. It goes from like sand where it feels like you're running on a beach to really rocky, steep hills. And I think for the folks who are running, a lot of people did the full 50 miles. Some people just wanted to run a mile. Some people wanted to run 5 miles. I think the first 2 years I filmed the run, I just filmed, Ku. I was really chasing him through the desert and like trying to get all these shots. And then the third year, I really just wanted to focus on the texture. I wanted to focus on things like dust, on the heat waves in the desert. I wanted to get the pine nuts that are growing in the trees. Like we were able to film some animals, like the deer that crosses the frame. And I think that is something so true to what like those details are really what kept his great grandfather alive. Like he knew the land so well, like he was so inherently tied to it. And so I think, even being an 8-year-old kid, there was something there that really did protect him because he had some of those instincts. Like he knew where the water was and where the choke cherries were growing. And that's a big reason of why I actually moved out to Reno. I moved from New York City to Reno to make this film, and I've been there for 3.5 years. Because I really wanted to make sure that I paid respect to not only Koo's community and Koo's family and not just disappear every time I'm filming, but also to really get to know the place and the land and the stories that the land holds.
Yeah. I don't know how much experience you probably had with cross country running before this project, but do you have a greater respect for it now, regardless?
Oh my goodness. I could coach cross country at this point, and track. I've never been to so many track meets and cross country meets. And I grew up, I was a figure skater growing up. And so a different sport, but still had like an athlete mentality. So I felt like I could relate to Koo on that level of the competitiveness. And I was so new to running, and just like, Koo, the way he runs, he just looks so effortless. It does not look hard for him when he's out running. And we had to work really hard to obtain that feeling in the film of just like exhaustion. And, my cinematographer was a runner. And so he was able to like kind of chase Koo down and like really stay with him. We used like an electric skateboard to capture some of the shots around the track and just try to make it feel the physicality of it. And so, yeah, I have a huge respect for running. I think, it's I don't know why people run. There's this like runner's high, and I did run like 5 miles in the Remembrance Run on the third year, because I really wanted to understand, what these kids were looking at because the desert, you look and it's just continuous. You feel like you're not getting anywhere. So you really have to be able to push yourself. And for Koo being somewhere with no competition, like he had to tap into something, out of body to be able to really like challenge himself.
Hmm. What are you hoping that viewers take away from the documentary after they get to see it?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the big takeaways is that there is hope and there are people who are doing like really, really amazing work and bringing the community together in the acts of preservation for our culture, our heritage, and also just like this idea of like, here's a family that's so supportive and so in awe of Ku. And, we need to see more healthy relationships on screen. We need to see healthy relationships to land. How can we treat a place or a person well if we don't have that as an example. And I think Ku's family really does like bring out the love and the joy, in Ku and being able to cheer him on through that. And so, today you don't people sometimes they don't know what a life of a Native American teenager is like, and I think Ku's family um is just showing that he's just like everybody else. He's a kid, he's a kid at the end of the day with a dream. And he has this deep, deep and painful history attached with us, but it doesn't, you don't have to like abandon your identity in order to move forward in life. You can carry those things with you and you'll be okay.
So as you said, you've been working on this for like 3.5 years. You were there for every run, uh, and your mind's been on remaining native probably for that whole time. But are you itching? Do you already have topics you're itching to make a documentary on in the future?
Definitely. I am moving back to where I'm from in upstate New York. I'm from Rochester, New York, and I'm from the Haudenosaunee territories up there. And I want to tell stories about my own community. I have a lot of ideas to really figure out how do we tell some of our creation stories. I want to make a really like meta film about maple syrup where because like there's these old maple syrup tappers, and part of the story is that like only people who worked really hard were the ones that were rewarded with the sap of maple syrup because of the process. And so I'm trying to figure out a way to tell that story, but maybe shoot it on analog film so I can put in the same amount of work that goes into, making the film as it does to make maple syrup.
Ah, uh,
So meta, I know.
Once again, thank you for spending your time answering questions about directing the documentary Remaining Native. It is playing two times at SIFF on Saturday, May 17th and Sunday, May 18th. It will also be available after SIFF is over on the SIFF streaming service. Paige will be there in person to answer questions after the screening, and apparently the producer Jessica Epstein, Koo Stevens will also be there, and Billy Mills, one of the executive producers.
Yes, I do want to say also we are going to be hosting a party at the Vera Project after our screening that's open to the community.
Mhm.
And there's going to be silk screening done there because we are working with Lauren Waters, who's also part of our program at SIFF. She's the short that plays beforehand. And we'll be hosting a 5K run with Daybreak Star. So that's going to happen on Sunday in the morning. So if you want to run with Koo and meet Billy Mills, that's all happening on Sunday.
The party Sunday too?
Party Saturday after the
Okay.
screen. So we could send you a flyer, you could post it.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.